Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Beating BDD, a podcast about body dysmorphic disorder from the BDD Foundation in the UK. I'm Claire Atherton and this is the second part of my interview with Oliver Butcher. In it, you'll hear him describe the self-abuse that was part of his BDD, how that affected his family and the advice he'd give anyone suffering from the disorder. Here's his interview. Could you tell us a little bit about what the impact was on your family during this time, all of the experiences you had with BDD?
Well, I think actually it's quite poignant that is being asked because we were discussing it as a family the other day before this podcast, and as I said earlier, my mum sort of thought that I had been lost. I had that she had lost me as a son, and that I wasn't the person I was anymore. There was incredible angst between me and my older brother because he's very much very, very hard person, very, 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 very strong personality. Emotions are second to him. It's all about, the bravado, the, get on with it kind of attitude. And that's something that I could never just do. And I think what the learn has been for both me and my brother and family and everyone in my family is, not everybody is the same. And, different situations affect different people. And yeah, I think that the biggest problem was there was an air of sort of stress around the house all the time. So no matter what time anybody would come in, I'd be in the mirror, And, another one of your podcasts spoke about this the last time about it as well, about sort of the self-harming side of things as well, and like how, what we do to ourselves with BDD. And my this is quite hard to say, but my big thing was abusing myself verbally. So I would do a lot of screaming, a lot of shouting, a lot of abuse whilst staring at myself in the mirror. It was almost like because I didn't want to, do any of the other methods, because I knew that in my head by sort of, doing like, cutting yourself or something was not going to solve the problem. But like some of you other people have said, I had this incredible sort of, I only describe it as a bubbling anger inside me that just had to explode, and the only thing I could do was scream, and there was a lot of times where I'd be just screaming for hours, hours. My voice is just gone because I'm just screaming so loud. So you can imagine coming home to that. You can imagine what my family would feel every day, coming home, trying to walk past me while I'm screaming on the mirror, on the landing. And that just caused straight away stress in everybody's lives. There was no getting around it. And because a lot of my behaviours were very... And I think this is quite interesting actually about because I've become so comfortable with my family, with BDD, and lots of people, for years I hid a lot of my problems, I hid a lot of my behaviours, but sort of like once my family knew about it, I kind of like took it as a sign of like, well, I can be anywhere and do my behaviours wherever I go in the house then, if you're all okay with it. And that really caused problems because of the certain areas where there is mirrors in our house. For example, I used to use this big old mirror that, I don't use it anymore, but this big mirror that I would see the whole of me. And it was right by my mum's bedroom. So, I would be there. I'd sometimes skulk down there at 2-3 in the morning and sort of be hiding, trying to be really quiet so I don't wake her up, but I'm outside the door, doing these behaviours and stuff. But it did create just a huge air of frustration. And, there was a recent sort of addition to my family as well. My mum recently got remarried. If you say recently, it's about three and a bit years ago now, 3-4 years ago. But that was another dynamic that came in, which, we haven't really spoken about really, me and my mum, about how my stepfather, Paul, has come into our family and has been an absolute rock for all of us. Because I don't really have a relationship with my own father. He doesn't know me as a person now. And this person, Paul, who came into our lives, he didn't know what he was getting into. My mum said to him at the time, are you sure you want to get into this? I don't know. I don't think you know the full extent about what's going on here. But, he's been an amazing calming influence on all of us. You know, he has helped the whole situation, and also obviously keeping my mum very happy as well. So that's. I think the biggest impact on my family though is probably just them seeing me slip away. You know, seeing me sort of deteriorate down, and constantly. You know, I can't tell you how many times that my brother and mum have used to grab me and say, you know, you've got to snap out of this. You know, you've got to get your life on track. You've got to get a job. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And I think the biggest problem for me was that I didn't know how to start the proceedings again. It's almost like I was starting from being born again. It almost felt like, as I had to reinvent myself. But the thing that got me, I think, the thing that about medication, that's another thing that people do discuss with BDD, is whether or not medication is, you know, is that something that you actually need? I would say that medication has its place 100%. And there's no problem with trying medication, that's for sure. If it gives you side effects, you can obviously stop them. But for me, what I felt like is I'm on medication now, and I take something called escitalopram, which is an SSRI. It's a motivational boosting kind of drug. And I think what that did for me is it just opened up my mind a little bit. And this is what got the ball rolling for me, you know, to start talking about it, you know, because at this stage I was still denying. For many, many years I was denying about that I had BDD, you know, even though what I would do, which is a funny story that I'm sure other listeners out there will be doing as well. I used to go onto Google and I used to type in, because you know how we ask Dr. Google all of our problems now, obviously.
He has all the answers.
He has all the answers. But I used to type in on Google, why do I hate myself? Why do I hate my face? Why do I hate my nose? And it used to come up straight away with body dysmorphic disorder. And I used to click on the link. I used to read the first paragraph and then I used to close it. I knew it was me, but I didn't want to admit it. So I literally would open Google, go on it, type on it, and then read the first paragraph and just close it. Just because I started to read something that I knew was me, but I didn't want to face it. And I did that for years. I did that for so many years. I just didn't ever take that step to say, yes, I have BDD. Yeah. You know.
And did your family know that you'd found this diagnosis online?
My mum has always known. She said. Okay. She said ever since I mean, maybe not, you know, from when I was a child, but she said definitely from my early teenage years, she definitely saw an obsessional kind of mindset coming into my life. She never outright said to me that I think you've got BDD, Oliver, you know. But what she did do is many times say to me that there is something going on, you know, with this appearance thing, with this whole thing. For a long time, I just thought I was depressed, you know, and I think that's, again, another thing that people might think is that, oh, I don't like myself, so I must just be depressed. But that's absolutely not what it is. You know, you could be the happiest person. You could seem like the happiest person in the world, not being depressed, because right now I'm not depressed. Okay. I say that now, is that my sort of depression that I used to feel, the sort of dark hole that you might feel that you're in, is sort of been lifted now. You know, I don't, on a day-to-day basis, I'm in a pretty good mood.
Fabulous.
Which is great, obviously. And I'm a very, very chatty, upbeat kind of person most of the time. And that's why most people would probably be very, very shocked when they hear this podcast, because they'll be very, very shocked to learn about these problems that I've had. But yeah, I think that my family, you know, with the input of Paul and the input of my brother coming really to the forefront in the last year, because for many years before that, my brother, me and him, we used to just butt heads. You know, it was his way or the highway, or, you know, my way was the wrong way. So I think what's happened is that he's also started to understand the condition a bit more, and understand that it's not something that I could help, that it's something that just sort of evolved by itself, manifested by itself. So, but yeah, I think just the biggest impact on my family was probably just seeing me deteriorate and seeing that person, you know, I think my mum said it to me the other day about seeing somebody's future sort of like just fall away before your eyes. And it might be quite difficult for people that don't have, I mean, I want to say this as well, is that it might be quite difficult for people that don't have a a support network like I have. And I really, really want to stress that is that, it has been amazingly important for me to have that support network. And if I'm being really honest, without it, I would not be here doing this. I really wouldn't be. Without my mum and brother, I would definitely not be here. It would have been over a long time ago. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because there's been some really, really desperate moments in my BDD. There's been two suicidal attempts. I won't go into detail about what they are, but two events that I was at the bottom of the barrel I'd ever been. And I think it's been my mum and brother that have pulled me back. And my nan as well. I'd say my nan as well has been the mother hen of our story. She's like the godmother of everything, So she takes all of our problems and listens to them. so yeah,
lovely. Can we talk a bit now about how you went from seeing the BDD diagnosis on the internet and just saying, okay, I'm not going there, to actually seeking help and having the therapy?
Yeah. So obviously, I've only been in therapy for a year. So it was maybe about a year and a half ago now that we started the ball rolling in terms of discussing what the possibilities are, about, me and my mum discussed, I came clean about what the things are about myself that I really disliked. And that's when my mum sort of threw it upon me and said, this is body dysmorphic disorder. What you see is not what other people see. Oliver, that's it. So I think what we tried to do originally, just sort of generic counselling. It did get me to open up about certain things, but that was mainly to deal with sort of like the disappointment side of things. And I think this is the overarching thing for me. The overall problem that I've always had is a feeling of not being good enough. And I think that has led me down this path of BDD, but sort of that was to deal with sort of like the breakup of my mum and dad and the death of my granddad and that kind of period in my life. I didn't tell that counsellor about anything to do with my appearance problems that I had. So again, I was not being honest with the GPs. I was not being honest with anybody, with myself. We would go to doctor's appointments and my mum would sit there and she would say to the doctor, like, he's lying, he's lying. But the doctor would say it's got to come from him, and that's where the most important thing is. And then what ended up happening is I think we had a very, very disruptive day. It was on my 22nd or 23rd birthday. I'm 26 now, so it's about 3 years ago now. This is when we started the ball rolling in terms of all the therapy and everything. Pretty much, it was my 22nd birthday, and we were going out, and I couldn't leave the house. My whole family came down from Manchester, which is where the rest of them live, and I literally couldn't leave the house. So we had to cancel the dinner. And I think that was the first time that I saw my problems affect everybody else, that it touched everybody's life for that moment, and it essentially ruined their day. That's the way I thought in my head. And this is another thing with BDD that I think a lot of people feel, which is you take everybody else's problems and you make them your own. So if your family is frustrated about your BDD, well, you take that worry and you put it on yourself as well. Like, they're also worried about it, So you have your own worry and then you have other people's worries as well. So it's like a double whammy with that. But then what ended up happening is we went to a support group. And this is where my real journey with treatment starts, I'd say. So it was probably about a year and 2-3 months ago. I think it was early January last year. And we just went to, my mum found the support group in the Priory in London. Obviously it was, because getting treatment for BDD is difficult. Finding the appropriate treatment is difficult, because it's very specified for each person individually as well. And we went down to support group in the Priory, and it was the first time I had ever sat in a room and heard other people discussing the things that I was thinking. And it was a really, really difficult experience. I mean, I did storm out of the room twice. I nearly didn't come back. And I think for me, the difficult part was actually seeing other people with the condition who were a lot older than me. That it really, really, really put me down, because I remember saying to myself while I was sitting there, well, I don't want to be like, Joe Bloggs over there, who's, had BDD since he was 14 and he's 55, And one of the things that Professor Veal said to me when I went to see him to get my diagnosis is that obviously people are at a support group because they need support, Oliver. Which is what I didn't really register in my head at the time, because, it didn't really make sense. But obviously you go to a support group because you need the support. And I found that really interesting after that. When I started to get better, what was interesting is actually going to these support groups actually in a way, I'm not saying this in a way to downplay anybody else's problems, but in a way, when you're in that recovery stage, sometimes it's actually best to not go to those things, because you don't want to actually discuss the condition too much. You want to distance yourself from talking about it as much as possible. So I think that's very interesting is if you're in a recovery stage, I think maybe sometimes it's not best to go to those groups, because actually having the conversation, for me anyway, brought it back up in my mind. I might go to that support group and then come home and then start thinking about it again and then be in the mirror for 7 hours, you see. But after then going to the support group, and taken about a couple of weeks to reflect on it, because when I came back, I said, I'm never going again. Shut myself in the room. Don't talk to me. Never going again. That was like I'm done. I'm not going to get better. So I'm going to be like this man over here in 40 years. So what then happened preceding that is, I think it was a bit more of you could say like an epiphany moment. It's sort of like you get to a stage where it's getting ridiculous, and there was a series of probably a couple of weeks where I think I was in the mirror for maybe like 8-9 hours a day, and I think I had some holiday through work, through John Lewis. And I think I didn't want to go on the holiday because I was scared. I was like, I'm just going to be at home all day. But I had to use up my holiday for the year. And I think preceding that holiday, and how terrible it was, and how I pretty much just didn't actually have a holiday. I just, stayed in my room and looked at myself in the mirror. That was when we took the step to get through to getting a diagnosis from Professor Veal, the godfather of BDD. Obviously, I can't, speak highly enough about him. He's, I've watched all of his conversations. He's incredibly understanding man about it as well, which is really helpful, obviously. But he really put things into perspective for me. He asked me, instead of what regular counsellors used to do, which is where, and I'm not downplaying any regular counsellor, but it's more of like these things have happened to you, it's going to get better, But what Professor Veal did to me is he actually challenged me. He challenged me straight away and said, let's talk about why are you doing these things? What are you trying to achieve? And these are questions that I hadn't actually asked myself. What am I actually trying to achieve by doing these behaviours? What's the end goal? And that just got me thinking about, what am I doing, really? And preceding that, I got the diagnosis of BDD, and then I started with the CBT therapy, which is what I've been doing for the last year nearly now, with my therapist, Judith, who is out of, again, based in London here, so we do have to travel. And I will mention that, again, we do private treatment, and I know how difficult it is, because we had to potentially wait, I think it was 8 months or so, to get anything on the NHS, and we just couldn't wait. So luckily, we are in a position where we can manage to pay for private treatment, and there's no way that we could have waited. Basically, it was at that point it was do or die for me. So started the treatment, and saw massive progress in the first maybe month or so. First month to 2 months. You start challenging the behaviours, you start talking about what you're trying to achieve. And I think CBT therapy is very, very important, because I think it's very important to find a therapist that you click with and that can challenge you and ask those difficult questions I mean, Judith says to me that she's too soft on me a lot of the time. She says to me all the time, "I'm too soft on you, Oliver. You know, I need to be harder on you." But obviously, sometimes that's not the best thing. You know, you BDD is a step ladder thing. It's you've got to take it step at a time. You can't go, and this is a very, very good thing to visualize as well. If you think about, for me, with my behaviors, 10 years of doing them, or 10 years of being in that, you know, environment, in that mindset of doing them. So you take a time span of a year to 10 years. You know, you've been doing something for 10 years. It ain't going to be fixed in just 1 year. And I think that's what happened to me at the start of my CBT, is that I got ahead of myself. I thought I was beating it straight away. I thought, this is easy. I'm doing it, you know. But what I was actually doing is I was finding counter behaviors in order to in order to just get me by the day. So instead of doing one behavior, I would find a different route around it, you know. So if my mum said to me, because we started doing things like taking mirrors down and blocking mirrors off for certain times of the day. So we used to have sheets up in the house. Essentially, after a certain time, I wasn't allowed to go into the mirror, you know, and my mum would make sure of that. But what I found was that I just started to develop counter behaviors. So I'd find a way around it, you know. So I wasn't actually attacking the real root cause of the problem. And that's what I've really started to do, you know, and that's all about exposure, all about the exposure. And I think the scary thing about exposure is when you go from doing no exposure to actually starting doing some. And now for me, it was almost as simple as pulling a strand of hair out of position. Because for me, 6 months ago to a year, or maybe a couple of years ago, you know, pulling a piece of hair out of position was a meltdown. You know, that's why I didn't go out in the wind. I didn't go out in the rain, you know, didn't wear a hood, didn't wear a hat, because if I felt it out of position, I actually felt it physically that something was wrong. Because I got so used to having my hair in a certain way, basically. I'd almost told my body that it had to be like that. And if it wasn't, then there was something wrong. And I think that's always what used to happen. So for me, the exposures really at the start was doing things like gently messing up my hair when I'm at home. You know, when I'm at home, no one's around, it's just me, just gently messing up your hair and then going away from the mirror. You know, but even that at the start was too difficult, because I'd find myself coming back to the mirror 2 hours later to then fix it all again. So I think, sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
About exposures being the most difficult thing?
Yes, yeah. So exposures are the most important thing. Yes, they are. They really are, because, and it's a step-by-step thing. You cannot go from doing, like for me, if my therapist said to me, like, if you go from just, say for example, wearing no product on your hair, or one day wearing loads of product and then wearing no product on your hair the next day, you know, that's too much of a jump. You can't do that. Again, we just spoke about the time span that you have on having this condition, and how I've only been in treatment for a very small amount of time. You can't compare the two. And it's the same for the exposures. You can't expect yourself to go and do that crazy exposure that you think that you could do. Like for some people, so for me as well, like going in a swimming pool was impossible. Couldn't go swimming. Couldn't do anything basically like that, you know, any sporting activity. But then we started going swimming once a week, me and my mum, late at night, no one there, just me and my mum, and little by little, you chip away at the block, you chip away at that monument that you're trying to break down, I guess. And for me, it almost is like that. It's almost like this perfection that I was searching, this holy grail of looking the same way every day was what I was trying to do, you know. And I used to become increasingly jealous of other people with that, because, you know, I used to see other people, and to them, I probably looked the same as I did yesterday. But to me, I didn't look the same as I did yesterday. And to me, they looked the same as they did yesterday. So I became increasingly jealous of other people in that sense as well. But yeah, the exposures, I mean, that's how you beat BDD. Well, that's how you get a leg up on it. You know, I mean, some people say that there is no real beating it. And I'm a bit on the fence about that. You know, I'm kind of, Is it something that can be beaten? Is it something that I'm always going to be dealing with? I think that there is probably going to be an element of that thought process in my head, but it's just not buying into it. The thing that me and Judith have really worked on, my therapist, is trying to see the BDD voice as really more of a separate entity. So when that thing is telling you to do those behaviors, when that voice is telling you that you need to do that, is that is not me telling me, that's the doubt voice, that's the lying voice that's telling me. So I've really tried to separate the two now. And that's what's really allowed me to regain most of my life, really. It's taken it step by step in terms of getting back to doing things. But my day-to-day sort of existence now is very, very different than it was even 5-6 months ago. And that's all down to small exposure steps, doing something new every day. And I think for me as well, for example, my days off used to be the worst day of the week. If I could work every day, then I would, because I would rather be occupied than at home just messing around, right? So regaining that time back and regaining actually enjoying days off and enjoying relaxing days is something that I've really enjoyed having back as well in my life. I think also, as I touch on the days off, is that the reason why they were so difficult though was just because I felt like I should be doing something. And if I wasn't doing something, I felt like I should be trying to perfect myself. It was like, if I wasn't at work doing something, then, I need to be doing something at home. I need to be occupying my mind. And a lot of the time it was to occupy the mind and to keep myself busy. And I just wanted to say one more thing about the exposures, which is don't give up on them, because they will persist. It's really I know some people have tried hypnotherapy and have tried all manner of different other types of therapy. And obviously everybody else is different and individual. But for me, I found, you have to challenge those things that you don't want to. And the more the phrase that the more you do it, the easier it becomes. It really does. It really, really does. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And I didn't believe that when I first heard it. I thought that's a lie. But that's the BDD mind telling me that that's a lie, not me, and it's amazing now, the fact that I could go out into the street here and I don't care that it's blowing the gale, I don't care. I could go to a swimming pool and I could go dive in, So those are things that have only come from being able to, you take the step and then you realise, look, the world didn't end. I'm alive. No one's looking at me any differently. And it's reconfirming those
Sky
things.
Doesn't fall in.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I wonder if I could just ask you one more thing. You have been given bits of advice throughout, which is amazing. But what would you say if you were talking to someone now who was feeling really dreadful? What would you tell them?
I would say you have every power to be able to do it. I think that BDD is one of those conditions that it's a self-deprecating condition. It feeds off its own badness, if that's a word I can use, badness. Yeah. It kind of self-perpetuating problem. It always is telling you that you are the problem. I think the first thing to really do is obviously try to seek or to really talk about it with somebody, because the hardest part of all of it was to actually accept that I felt this way about myself. Being that I'm a young man as well, very, very frowned upon in most economic circles. Obviously, to be vain as a man is to be a weak person. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I can give is don't give into it, because you can beat it. You can get better with it. And actually, let me rephrase that. You might never beat it completely, but there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's just about those little steps, baby steps to get there. Don't think about like I did and think about the end goal of where you want to be. I just take every day, day by day now. I don't catastrophize about the rest of the week. I don't think about what I'm doing on the weekend, because I know that I think it's also about learning who you are as well, and learning your own mind and learning what triggers you. And I know that if I work myself up about like a party on the weekend or something, I know that is going to affect me. So it's a learning game as well with yourself, about learning what situations will put you in a worse frame of mind. But I would say, I'd say don't give up on it and just take little steps, because that's how you get there in the end. No one takes a giant leap up the stairs, do they? They take, no one goes from stair 1 to stair 12 unless you're, the BFG or something. But, we each take a step at a time. And I think that's the same for BDD. So,
yeah, absolutely. And just quickly, just reminded me while you were talking about the wiggly line that we talked about before, recovery being a wiggly line.
So when you start BDD recovery, you might think it's going to be a straight line, but it is a very, very up and down, squiggly line. There is no straight route. There's peaks and troughs, and I'm sure I'm going to have peaks and troughs even now in the next couple of months. But as long as for me now, I have I don't say majority anymore, because actually I'm actually past that now in terms of majority of days are better than bad days. That was kind of like for me, like an indication of how I'm doing. 7 days, how many days are bad, how many days are good? That was kind of like my mathematical, a BDD mathematical equation there for you. But I think it's important just to go day at a time, because if you start catastrophizing and thinking about where am I going to be in 6 months, where am I going to be in a year, you never get there. You always find a way to pull yourself away from it. I did anyway.
And the setback also doesn't have to be, you're not going back to zero, are you?
No, and that's really important to remember, is not to forget where you come from with it. I mean, if you have a bad day, like for me, I had a bad day the other day. A bad day for me now is very different from a bad day a year ago. But a bad day for me now would be maybe spending more than, say, 10 minutes in the morning in front of the mirror. That's what I would classify as I'm doing too much. My therapist, Judith, would say 5 minutes. She would say that 10 minutes is too long. But I think at the end of the day, you've just got to take those baby steps. And that's it. And that's all you can do, day by day, and just keep going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Oliver. It's been really interesting to talk to you. Thanks
Welcome.
So much for coming in.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed both parts of Oliver's story. If you missed the first half, which was episode 10, you'll find it on the BDD Foundation website, as well as on major podcast apps and on Spotify. For another perspective on Oliver's story, episode 12 will feature a really frank conversation between his mum Debbie and his brother Daniel, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, remember that this podcast isn't therapy, so please do seek help from a trained professional. Thanks for listening.